What's up? Welcome to Nowstalgia. Dave here with a review of Origin, the new drama film from Ava DuVernay, out now in limited release. This was a film that was attempting to compete for the Oscars, didn't end up making much of an awards push despite some reservations from the creators. Nonetheless, the movie's out now. This is I think, a very interesting, audacious, ambitious film that's definitely worth seeing, worth examining. I think the effectiveness of the film is very much up and down. This is a kind of like adaptation slash diving into the best-selling book Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson, the author. And this film, Origin, basically dramatizes the life of Isabel Wilkerson, played by Aunjanue Ellis in the film. And it's about Ellis basically coming to around to the idea of creating this book that ended up being a bestseller in 2020, coming to this idea and like having this enlightenment about how to make this book while experiencing a lot of personal tragedy in her own private life. And it's again, I think it's pretty up and down. You know, I think the most compelling stuff about Origin is largely about the thesis of the book Caste, which is largely, to be very broad and brief here, kind of linking the experience of Black people in the United States, from the Middle Passage through segregation, linking that experience to the treatment of Jews in Nazi Germany, and also the treatment of Dalits, formerly known as untouchables, in India and their treatment within the Indian caste system. And the thesis is basically that caste and the similarity across these three examples of systemic and widespread oppression, it's actually caste, and that hierarchy that it creates is the kind of root cause of this oppression, and it's not race. Whereas Americans, we obviously often default to race because that is what we know, and that is obviously so important to the uh, what the Black experience in the United States, right? But in India, this oppression to the Dalits, well, they're all brown. They're all the same race, and Jewish people were viewed as white until the Nazis tried to change people's minds about that. So on one hand, that's like I think a really like compelling way to think about things. That's I think a thesis that's been challenged despite the book's success by many, in terms of being an oversimplification and kind of not acknowledging of class per se, kind of just leaving all like the academic thought around the idea aside. I think that's the most interesting stuff in the movie Origin. And I think what kind of like drags the movie down for me, which is it's about 2 hours 20 minutes long. There's a lot of scenes. There's a lot of cutting. We see as Aunjanue Ellis, as she's going through these trials and tribulations in her own life. Losing her husband to a sudden brain injury and death, played by John Bernthal, lovingly, like great performance from Bernthal in a small role. Losing her husband and losing her aging mother within a year's time, and then also beginning to deal with the slow decay of her sick cousin she's close with, played by Niecy Nash. She's dealing with all that and like all that that loneliness, that aloneness, but also like this kind of the cascade of trauma while she's coming through this thesis. And meanwhile, the movie Origin is also, as Wilkerson is like having this enlightenment and trying to connect these dots in her head on the whiteboard and whatnot. We're seeing things she's like talking about in her work dramatized on screen. So we see scenes in Nazi Germany. We see a book burning scene that I think is quite visceral, quite in your face. We see moments of slaves on the Middle Passage, on slave ships, in the bowels of the ships on the ocean. We see the Deep South in America. We see India, during the 20th century, and it's some of those scenes I think are quite good. They look good for sure, but to me, it kind of like muddled the movie, and I thought like ultimately like, it kind of got a little melodramatic for me because it's trying to serve the individual Wilkerson journey alongside these really heady and heavy and complicated, dramatic themes. and how they relate to like our real world. I think there's a few really good scenes. Like there's a moment where Wilkerson is at like kind of like a like family like, and friends like kind of like cookout outside, and she explains to her cousin Marion, Niecy Nash, explains like kind of like the core premise of the cast and why it's not race but it's cast, and it's like kind of like a really compelling like 10-minute scene, 5-minute monologue type thing, and then you have Marion be like that, say that in normal people's terms. That's what people need to hear, and to me that's like the best like selling point of the film, because like that's something like really grabs you, and I really like that scene a lot. I think other stuff though, I think probably the other good thing I really liked is when Wilkerson goes to Germany and she's with some friends and colleagues and stuff, and they kind of have like like a academic disagreement about the idea of linking the treatment of Jews in Nazi Germany and the treatment of Black people in the United States, and one was commodification for capitalism versus one was purely for extermination and removal. In terms of the similarity but difference is the point of view of Wilkerson's colleague, and another compelling scene for sure. But like I think ultimately like it gets a little like I said, a little melodramatic, a little I think like proud of its grand paint strokes towards the end, and I just don't know if it like truly gets in there, because again like this is like I think a lot of really complicated study and connection and way of thinking about the world and history. And the movie doesn't do anything beyond presenting that idea. And I think if you maybe had focused more on that and less on Wilkerson's personal life, or maybe didn't focus on like dramatizing the scene she's talking about in the past and just focus the movie more on the present. It's taking place in the early 10s. Speaking of, I forgot, it also dramatizes the death of Trayvon Martin, the murder of Trayvon Martin, right? A lot of these things are like tough to see dramatized, right? I think that's the point of the film. But I just don't know if it gets quite as profound as it wants to be as a movie. And I think part of that's just like the form is just a bit messy. So definitely a movie that compelled me, made me think. And I think that's primarily the result of the just general thesis of the book cast. So interesting for sure. I think Ava DuVernay, she wrote and directed this movie. Her first film since the Wrinkle in Time adaptation. Of course, since then she had done When They See Us on Netflix, the Emmy winner. And yeah, like I think she's obviously a very talented, intriguing, and ambitious filmmaker. That remains the case. And even if I didn't totally like this movie, I think there's a lot of things to admire about the approach to, I think, really like intense and complicated material. So obviously she remains, I think, in high demand. She's a very witty person. So yeah, that's Origin. Out now slowly from, I believe, Neon. Let me know, what did you think of Origin? Did you connect more with its overall conclusion more than me? Let me know. And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.